Every 4 years, the World Cup arrives on the planet like a massive weather event. Offices come to a complete standstill. Grown adults weep in public, openly and without any apology. An entire nation once ceased to function simply because a ball went wide of a goalpost. And somewhere in the center of all this collective madness, there you are, completely unbothered, perhaps even slightly annoyed that your social media feed is overflowing with jerseys. You have likely been told you are weird for this, or perhaps even cold. Maybe you have had someone look at you with genuine concern, as if your lack of interest in a football tournament is a medical symptom that requires investigation. Here is the reality. The psychology actually points in the opposite direction. So, why do billions of people care so intensely about something over which they have literally zero control? It is a game where strangers they have never met kick a ball on a pitch in a country they have probably never visited, and somehow these fans feel as though they personally won or lost. We played terribly today, they say, but you were just sitting on your sofa. This is a psychological phenomenon known as BIRGing, or basking in reflected glory, which was first studied by Robert Cialdini in 1976. He observed that university students were significantly more likely to wear their school's branded apparel the morning after their football team won than after they lost. They had not played, they had not coached, and in many cases they had not even watched the game. But proximity to the victory felt like ownership of the victory. The self, apparently, is a very opportunistic thing. What Cialdini was truly documenting was how desperately people utilize group membership to manage their own self-esteem. When the team wins, we won. When they lose, the language suddenly shifts. They played poorly today. The ego quietly sidesteps the wreckage. This is not cynicism. It is simply how social identity works. Now, this is where you come in. The person who watched the last World Cup final and felt absolutely nothing. Because what sports fandom is truly doing on a deep level is providing a kind of scaffolding. The tribal instinct, the fundamental need to belong to something, does not simply disappear in humans who do not follow sports. You have presumably just built that scaffolding somewhere else, perhaps in a subculture, a creative community, a career you are intensely obsessed with, or a friend group where you feel genuinely known rather than performing enthusiasm for a team you selected, mostly because your father liked them. People who do not care about the World Cup are not missing the human desire for belonging. They have simply refused a specific vehicle for it. And frankly, that vehicle is a bit strange when you examine it closely. Let us actually consider what is happening in the brain of a deeply invested fan during a tense match. The uncertainty of the outcome creates a sustained state of anticipation. The reward circuitry fires not just when something good happens, but in anticipation of whether it might. Neuroscientists call this unpredictability, a core feature of behavioral compulsion, which is the same structural mechanism that makes slot machines so difficult to walk away from. It is intermittent reinforcement. You do not know if the next spin will pay off. Your brain stays engaged because the resolution keeps not arriving. Sports exploit some of the same reward mechanics that make gambling so compelling. The gap between expectation and outcome, the near miss, the stoppage time goal that arrives just as you had accepted a draw. These are powerful hooks. For people who do not feel this pull, whose brains simply do not hook onto the outcome of a match, this is not emotional flatness. The hook requires a prior attachment. Without identification with one of the teams, there is no stake. And without a stake, the uncertainty does not feel compelling. It feels like watching a coin flip for an hour and a half. There is also something worth naming regarding the social pressure surrounding the World Cup specifically, as opposed to regular league football. Every 4 years, there is this cultural moment where even people who do not follow club football are expected to suddenly care, because it involves nations. Now, it is not just a team. It is your country, your flag, and your collective identity made physical by 11 players you have never met. For some people, that framing works perfectly. The national dimension amplifies the attachment. It taps into something even larger than team identity. For others, and this is where it gets rather interesting, the national framing actually makes it weirder, not more compelling. You did not choose where you were born. You may have had complicated feelings about your country for a decade, and now you are supposed to feel personally victorious because a man from that same country kicked a ball into a net. The emotional arithmetic does not land the same way for everyone. People who feel alienated from or indifferent to national identity find the emotional logic of the World Cup to be the most alien part of the whole experience. This is not to say those people do not care about where they are from. They just have a messier relationship with it than a flag on a jersey can really hold. Studies on social identity consistently show that the intensity of how much you tie your self-concept to a group directly shapes how much that group's wins and losses actually mean to you. If the group never really grabbed you, the outcomes will not either. This tends to reframe everything a little uncomfortably for fans and non-fans alike. The version of sports fandom we are discussing, this deep emotional attachment to strangers performing athletically on a screen, is extraordinarily new in the span of human history. For most of our existence as a species, you could not follow a team. You could not even conceive of one, really. The parasocial attachment to people you have never met, feeling their wins as yours and their losses as a kind of personal grief, is a product of mass media, television, and global broadcast rights. It became possible at scale sometime in the mid-20th century. Researchers like Horton and Wohl were already noting in the 1950s that television was creating entirely new categories of one-sided emotional relationships between audiences and strangers on screen, something that had no real historical precedent. So, when people describe sports fandom as some ancient, hardwired instinct, and yes, the underlying tribalism is real, the particular version of it we are talking about, with jerseys and face paint, and feeling personally bereaved when strangers lose a match you watched alone in your kitchen, is a product of the 20th century, not prehistory. If you want to get weird about it, the person sitting completely unbothered through a World Cup final might actually be closer to how humans were built to respond. That is not a hot take. It is just a strange thing to sit with. The idea that non-fans are somehow missing a universal human experience is odd when the experience has only existed since the advent of color television. And to be fair to fans, the research backs them up. Highly identified supporters show real gains in self-esteem, lower levels of loneliness, and a sense of shared meaning that functions like a social lifeline for many people. That is not to be completely dismissed. The distinction worth drawing, which applies in both directions, is identity that fits versus identity that is borrowed because the room expects it. The fan who genuinely lights up when their country scores, who feels the loss the next day like a low hum in the background, is getting something real out of that. The person sitting next to them faking it, performing grief they do not feel because opting out seems socially costly, is just exhausted. The psychology of not caring about the World Cup is not, in the end, about being more or less self-aware than anyone else. It is just that certain collective experiences land and others do not, and you cannot really manufacture that landing. Apathy is indifference to everything. This is something more specific, a signal, really, that your attachment system has already found somewhere else to be. Thus, your brain is not wired wrong. It is just elsewhere. And if you know exactly where, if you have a thing or people or a world you actually light up about, that is the whole point. That is what the fandom was always trying to achieve. One last thing. There are resources available for those dealing with common struggles like sleep that doesn't fix anything, focus that keeps slipping, or a brain that treats stillness like a threat. There are guides for dopamine, sleep, and focus, each built around daily actions rather than just more information to forget. If you want more deep dives into the psychology of our modern world, make sure to engage with our content. If this exploration of the human psyche and the hidden mechanics of belonging changed how you view the world around you, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the deep-seated patterns of behavior that define our modern lives. Join us as we map the territory of the mind. The next discovery is just around the corner.